Good evening. The League of Women Voters of Pocatello welcomes you to our 2023 Idaho Legislative Preview. I'm Susan Carter, the moderator for tonight's forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization which seeks to promote active participation of citizens in government. Tonight's forum is being aired live on KISU. Recordings of this event may not be used without express written approval of the League. No part of a League-sponsored video production may be used in advertising or in any way to promote a candidate. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety. The format for tonight will be as follows. I will call on each panelist, and they will each have 3 minutes for their introduction, and then 2 minutes to answer each question. We will rotate through the candidates for each question. Questions were compiled and sent to the panelists by the Pocatello League. We will not be taking questions from the audience this evening, and viewers will be muted. Panelists, please mute yourself when you're not answering. Tonight, we will hear from Senator Jim Guthrie, Senator James Ruchti, Representative Dan Garner, and Representative Nate Roberts. Representative Rick Cheatham declined to participate, and Representative Dustin Manwaring had another event this evening. You can email Representatives Manwaring and Cheatham for their written answers to tonight's questions. Now, starting with Senator Guthrie, you will each have up to 3 minutes to share your views on the issues and the bills you expect to be introduced during the upcoming legislative session. Please tell the audience which committees and leadership roles you have been assigned. And what do you see as the greatest opportunity in the upcoming session? What do you see as the greatest problem? And what are your goals for this session? Senator Guthrie?
Well, thank you and good evening, League. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts. As far as my responsibilities and committees, I'm on the Commerce Committee, I'm on the Resources Committee, and I'm going to be chairing the State Affairs Committee this year. So that's going to keep me busy. As far as the opportunities and problems, they could very well be the same thing, and that's the amount of money that we have with over $1.5 billion in reserves and another $410 million set aside during the special session for education. And, and in some respects, and having been through a downturn up here, it's almost easier when on budget decisions when there's less money than when there's more. But anyway, I think we will see fierce competition for how the money's spent. I would caution against ongoing commitments, and I think there's a lot that feel the same way. I'm hearing an interesting thing that the House may try to, on the Joint Finance Committee, hold those votes separate so the House could actually kill a funding bill without the Senate participating or vice versa. Again, no specifics on the $410 million for education, and it's coming from sales tax, which is kind of a new thing. And I'm a little uneasy with it going down that road, but that's a path we've started on. And they're also now advocating for the use of sales tax for property tax relief. And we need to remember that in a high inflation environment, with all of the COVID money that's been given to the states and inflation as high as it is, of course, sales tax revenue is going to be up substantially. And we just have to wonder if that'll sustain. And there's a lot of unknowns about the economy. And are we headed into a recession? There's a lot of indicators that would suggest that maybe we are. You talk to builders and lenders and realtors and title company folks, and they're seeing the impacts of the economy slowing. And I think, the feds were obviously tardy in raising interest rates to try to cool the economy, in my opinion. Looks like I'm down to a minute. A couple things, other things that are going to be challenges. 20 new senators, 31 new House members. Politics in the Senate have changed significantly, particularly on the Education Committee, which is a big thing for everybody. And so there'll be a much more conservative approach. There'll be a lot of push for parent choice and vouchers this year. Of course, property tax is going to be a big issue, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on social issues, and they're going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy from some of the other things that maybe need to be addressed, and how we deal with those and how we deal with the property tax relief that we need is going to be a couple of my concerns and goals. Thank you.
Thank you. James Ruchti?
Thank you. Appreciate the League putting this on. I think it's a great service to the community. So I'm the Assistant Minority Leader in the Senate. This will be my first term in the Senate. I've served one other term in the House, and then about 10, 12 years ago, I served 2 terms in the House. I'll be on 3 different committees: Judicial and Rules. I'll be on Commerce Committee with Senator Guthrie, and then Senator Guthrie will be my committee chair in State Affairs. And I think that's going to be the State Affairs Committee is going to be a strong committee. A lot of controversial bills show up in the State Affairs Committee on both the House and Senate side. And so I think it'll be an important committee to try to stop some bad bills and hopefully get some good legislation passed. As far as what I think is important legislation that's coming up this year, probably echoing a lot of things Jim just said, but property taxes has been an important issue the last few years. And every year we know that our voters, our constituents want us to do something about property taxes, but we don't quite get it done. This year, I'm hoping that'll be different. I hope we'll provide some property tax relief. Housing scarcity is a big issue throughout the state, especially I think in the Treasure Valley, but throughout the state. There's a reason that we have a surplus. For those of you who kind of watch the legislature, that we've had surpluses the last 2 or 3 years, large surpluses. In fact, last year it was around $2 billion. This year, it's going to be close to that. And there's a reason for that. It's because we, a few reasons. One, we had a bunch of federal money come during COVID, but perhaps more importantly, we have a lot of new people moving into the state. My big worry is in dealing with those surpluses, we are not appreciating the infrastructure demands that all that new population brings to the state. A need for new schools, a need for roads, a need for bridges, for internet in our rural communities. We're generally aware of it, but I think there's more we can do. The most important thing that's going to come up is an attack on public education. There's going to be a real effort to create a voucher system, which will suck money out of the public education system and send it to private schools, religious schools, and home schools, where there won't be accountability and our rural communities will suffer the most.
Thank you. Representative Garner?
Yes, I'm a freshman. This is my first term, and I'm lucky enough and I'm excited that they put me on the Education Committee. I'm on the Agriculture Committee and the Judiciary and Rules Committee. I would echo everyone else's sentiments. I think education is going to be a hot topic this year. I would guarantee that there's going to be some vouchers, legislation on the vouchers coming forward, and then funding. They're always going to want some new funding. I'm concerned about where and how they're going to allocate apply the funding that's already been allocated to education. I'm hoping that we can restrict the strings that they put on it so that the district can put it where the school districts need it. The school districts are not the same. They're all different, and they all have different problems and priorities where that money needs to go. And I'm hoping that we can limit the strings attached so that they can spend it where they know it needs to go. Water is always a hot topic. I'm sure it will be again this year. We've seen signs of that on the Snake River already. The biggest problem I see that the state is facing is the rapid growth that Idaho is having. It affects everything. It puts pressure on all the infrastructures, schools, property tax, water. And with this growth, we need to find a way to help fund it through the growth itself, which I think can be done. We just have to do it carefully and think about it. My goals is I'd like to see more funding and programs in our high school for technical classes and career path oriented classes. for those students not wanting to go to higher education, along with more opportunities for those wanting to pursue our higher education, such as dual enrollment and more online classes. And perhaps we should look at giving an incentive for early graduation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Roberts.
Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity of being here. I really do appreciate what the League of Women Voters does here in Pocatello and across our nation. So I also am a freshman legislator, and I'm looking very much forward to working with Representative Garner. I believe we're on the Agricultural Affairs Committee together. And, you know, surprisingly, that was not one of my first choices for committees, but it's definitely going to be a good one to participate with here in Idaho and being a representative in Eastern Idaho. The opportunities that I took it in a different direction, really. You know, when we went through the orientation and organization meeting here at the end of November, beginning of December, I was really keen legislators and find out that, you know, we all have a common interest, and that is to make or to take Idaho into the future in an effective manner. And so, you know, I looked at the opportunity as a freshman to be able to build relationships with those individuals and to work together with them to find where we have the common ground to be able to move forward in Idaho. And, you know, certainly the property tax issues, our housing needs that we have across the state, more in the rural areas, I think, our education issues, you know, these are the things that everybody finds very, very important. And I really do look forward to working with them. And I see that as a real opportunity to be able to make things better for everybody here in Idaho. I think we've got a good system in place. I think that the legislators that have been elected have, you know, like I said, a common interest, and it's going to be quite a learning process for all of us, I think. And I'm really, really looking forward to participating in that. And I thank the voters of Pocatello for putting their trust in me to go and represent them in that area. I have taken the opportunity recently to go to some of the classes at our schools. I sat in a class at Highland High School here in Pocatello and spoke with the teacher and the students. And education is definitely something that we need to work on. Surprisingly, though, they're really concerned about the quality of the building that they have there. And I think that that's one of the things that we could certainly work on with some of the surplus. And I think there's a great opportunity to move forward on that too. So, but again, I thank you for the opportunity of being here, and I look forward to hearing this discussion.
Thank you. Okay, we'll start on our questions. You'll each have 2 minutes to give your response. Our first question is on education funding. Idaho school districts are unable to pass bonds to provide adequate schools for their students. In 2005, the Idaho Supreme Court ruled that the legislature must maintain a thorough system of public schools across the state as required by the Idaho Constitution. Members speaking at the Idaho Association of Taxpayers Conference asked legislators, to provide adequate state funding to maintain schools rather than cut their taxes. An interim legislative group discussed various proposals to change Idaho's system for funding school buildings. What will you do to introduce legislation to reduce the burden on communities to fund school facilities? And do you support using Idaho's budget surplus to alleviate the burden on property taxpayers to fund school facilities? We'll start this question with Senator Ruchte.
Let me make sure I've got my microphone on. Yes, I'm a huge supporter of public education. Public education in Idaho throughout our history has been the avenue that working families have used to better both themselves and their children and their children's children and beyond. So we need a strong system of education. Our Constitution requires it because our founding fathers recognized that it was the pathway to success for our families. the Idaho legislature has not always done its job in that respect. And in fact, that 2005 Supreme Court decision recognized that. It actually said the legislature was failing to fulfill its constitutional responsibility. But then, unfortunately, the Idaho Supreme Court didn't go beyond that. It just recognized the failure and then didn't require anything further. I voted for the $410 million increase to public education that we took up in the special session. And I'm in favor of continuing to invest in our public education system. We have only recently, in my opinion, started really investing in public education in a way that will improve outcomes. And I give a lot of credit for that to the Little administration, because I think they've Governor Little has focused heavily on education and done a good job for us. We need to be aware of any attempt to remove public funds from public education through vouchers. And as everybody's recognized, that is coming, but it will destroy our public education system if we start removing public funds to fund vouchers.
Thank you. Representative Garner?
Yes, some districts can pass bonds and some have a hard time. I feel that most people understand the importance of education and the benefit that it brings to our communities and our state. The past legislators have just passed new funding for the schools, and to my knowledge, it is the first time that they've used sales tax to fund education. This is a new source of funding, and I will want to make sure that it is sustainable. I would hate to commit to something that will not work for the long term, but I am willing to look at any legislation that is brought forward. How it is drafted would determine on whether or not I'd support it. The rapid growth that we are experiencing needs to help pay for the infrastructure that it is relying on. This is just one of instance where this needs to happen. I would support spending more on education. Idaho is still one of the lowest in the nation on per student spending. Thank you.
Representative Roberts?
I've got my mic on.
Hey.
Yeah, like I said in my opening, I did get to spend some time in one of the classrooms here in Pocatello, and I've been looking for ways to continue to do that, and I'm hoping to do that in the off season also. I think our education is such an important thing, and the public education system, obviously, I mean, the founding fathers of the state of Idaho were clear, in their statements in our Constitution that our Republican form of government relies upon the intelligence of the people in their opening statement. And so they understood that the public education was very important, and they made that quite clear. And I think that, we should continue to fund that education system through our tax dollars. And if we were to start opening that up, to use tax dollars in whether a voucher form or school choice, it's simply going to provide two poorly funded systems. And frankly, for the rural areas, you can pretty much write off any sports programs that they may have if they begin to lose funds for their public systems. So, I really do believe that the public education system is what made our country great. And the stronger we can make that, the better we build our future. We provide for our children in ways that we provide for our futures too. So it really is a vital issue to take care of. I do think that the surplus should be used to support some of our school districts, especially when it comes to the facilities, because the facilities in many areas are in dire need. We've got leaking roofs, poor restroom facilities. All of these can be taken care of. We just have to find the will to do it. So.
Yeah. Senator Guthrie?
Yeah, thank you. I do agree that in the messages that I'm hearing from folks is that the voice to fund education over lowering income tax is pretty deafening. People prefer that we use that money to fund education rather than lowering income tax. And I think we went to that well probably about enough as far as lowering income tax. Now, as far as the voice to lower property tax, that's not nearly as loud. And there's maybe some property tax relief, if we're able to pull that off, could actually help reduce the burden for taxpayers as they try to help fund schools. I think something we kind of lose track of and we need to keep in mind is the state has stepped up education funding in recent years, and sometimes that gets forgotten. And there's been quite a commitment made on a variety of levels as far as education. I'm sure there'll be more this year. When you look at the 410 additional money, the one thing I've told folks is we need to make sure that they keep the commitment that is additional money and that they don't short the education budget somewhere else as they plug in that 410. I actually worry that might happen. And then along with the huge surplus, there will be some opportunities to further strengthen education. I think if it's done right, we've got tremendous opportunities this year. As far as the surplus for school facilities, all districts aren't created equal. So how do we figure that balance so that these rich districts that are building these extravagant facilities and buildings, do we treat them the same as a rural district that doesn't have the luxuries of a high tax base and a lot of business and revenue? Maybe we could do something where it's more uniform, like offering low or no interest loans somehow through the state for facilities, or maybe even doing things like looking at building designs and maybe plagiarizing those from each district so we don't, reinvent the wheel every time there's a new project going on. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next question is on parental rights and education. During the last legislative session, many bills were introduced to ensure that parental voices were heard. Among them included a failed bill supporting vouchers for parents to use taxpayer dollars to pay for tuition in private and parochial schools. Another failed bill attempted to ban selected library books and to fine librarians. The bill that passed increased parental involvement in district curriculum committees. How do you balance supporting the majority whose children go to publicly funded schools with the minority asking for the use of taxpayer dollars for vouchers, even though it violates the Idaho Constitution? Second part of that question is, how do you support parental rights while ensuring the freedom of speech for all? And we'll start this question with Representative Garner.
Having sat on my local school board for 9 years, I realize the real question here is how do we get parents more involved? They need to know what the school teachers are teaching, and they need to look at their children's homework and know what is being required of their students. They need to know what books their children are checking out of the libraries. The bottom line is it's the parents' responsibility to know what their children are learning and reading. If they disagree with certain books being used in curriculum in the schools, they need to go before the school board. And if the school board agrees that it's not up to community standards, it is the school board's responsibility to remove this book and use something else. Parents need to become more involved with their children and their education. The state was never set up to be the final say of what they are taught. How do you balance that with free rights? It's just like what I said. The parents need to take responsibility for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Roberts?
Well, Representative Garner did a great job of pointing that issue out, that really education has always been part of the responsibility of the parents. And the better involved or the more involved parents are with the child's education, the better that child learns. And, the move to, the school choice movement, I think is, like I said previously, it's what it'll create is two separately, but yet still poorly funded systems, because it'll take funds from the public system and try to inject those into a private system. And, eventually you'll wind up with, again, the systems that just don't meet the needs for the students. And we've had a public system that's set up and very functional. It can be better, obviously. Representative Garner again had mentioned that the school districts themselves really should be in charge of where the money that they receive from the states goes. I think that they should be able to make those choices based on their needs rather than being, handcuffed to requirements that the legislature may send down. So these are things that I would personally support. Making sure that school districts have the right to spend the money as they see fit, and to make sure that we keep our public system fully funded and at every opportunity we can. I'm not saying that school choice isn't something that parents have the opportunity for. They do. They can put their children in any school they choose to, but we can't simply be handing them state dollars to do that.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie?
Thank you. As far as vouchers goes, we have to keep in mind that parent choice in education of their children is already in Idaho, and that camel's nose has been under the tent for many years now. And this session, with the way the Senate Education Committee is stacked, and that's not by accident, by the way, there will be a significant push for vouchers. I can guarantee that. I think the key to keep in mind is that, recognizing that we already do have parent choice, is how do we keep the pendulum from swinging too far in the direction of harming publicly funded schools? And, maybe it's through an aggressive accountability requirement. I don't know all the answers, but we're going to have to play offense a little bit to make sure that equilibrium is and that right balance is struck as this issue moves forward. I don't entirely agree with the violation of the Constitution that was referenced in the question. It seems to me the Constitution is silent over the legislative options for school choice. And I'm not suggesting that I'm thrilled by that observation, and maybe somebody can further enlighten me. But I think we have to address this issue from the perspective that we have school choice, and how do we create that balance for a model going forward. One of the reasons that I think we have this urgency or this desire to have these choices, and I've seen this ever since I've been in the legislature, the go-on rate is 40% or below, and something is missing in our education model, whether it's the enticement from higher ed to get kids to go on up, or whether it's something we need to do different in the K-12. But that's been always troubling to me, that we can't get that going, get that a little better. As far as the offensive materials in the library, I voted against that bill last year, but we do have to watch against that. If that is the case, we can't afford to have offensive materials in our libraries. And as far as the parental involvement, that's important. There has to be a balance there as well. Sometimes parents can get a little overzealous, and we've seen that particularly in sports when parents want their kid to play. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Senator Ruckty?
Yeah, so, as everybody I think is mentioned so far, Idaho is actually a leader in parental choice in public education. We can look at a number of different programs that we have, but let's just take one: public charter schools. Idaho dove right into the public charter school movement about 25 years ago, and it's been very successful. My wife taught at a charter school. My boys were both educated at a charter school. Charter schools are within the public education system, and they give parents the ability to take a look at a different way of educating, decide whether that fits their student better, and then to send their kid, that child or that kid, to that school. And it's publicly funded. Now that's just one program. We even have an online charter school for homeschoolers, but again, it's publicly funded. And with public funds comes public accountability. I mean, that's the whole idea behind public education, is we have made a social compact with one another that we're going to make sure, whether our kids are in the school system or not, the public school system, we're going to help each other pay for our kids' education. And we do that because an educated populace makes for a more responsible populace, a better democracy, better economy, lower crime rates. So there's a lot of benefits to it. The key is it should be a public school system available to all students. this effort to take public monies and to spend it on religious schools and private schools and homeschools without accountability is going to create two education systems, neither one of which will be properly funded, and they will both deteriorate over time. So we have got to stick to public education with public accountability.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to healthcare rights. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, known as HIPAA, assures confidentiality in healthcare. It has been reported that over $250,000 of legislative funds has been used to defend challenges to last year's women's healthcare bills. With HIPAA and the high costs of defending these laws in mind, does the government have the right to intervene in women's personal healthcare decisions? And what changes in Idaho's abortion law would you support? We'll start with Representative Roberts.
Well, thank you for putting me first on this question. Obviously, it's a very sensitive issue. I believe that we're all pro-life. Ultimately, we want to see all life succeed. But obviously, when it comes to women's rights and their personal choices for their health care, I think that takes precedence over what the state of Idaho has been trying to do. And you had mentioned the $250,000. I saw actually in today's Idaho State Journal that number is now over $300,000. And these are going to continue, these challenges to the individual's rights. I mean, I'm not pro-abortion for contraceptive use, but yet it's not my choice. It's the individual's choice, and that's my firm belief. And that the government is stepping in between that, I think gets to be a little questionable to personal rights and personal liberties. And I think that we could do a much better job. Now, that being said, obviously, the state of Idaho, these laws that we have in place, I think that we do need to make some room. Then I think that would be acceptable for those that are on the conservative side to, allow for a woman's health care issues that may be involved with the pregnancy or difficulties in a pregnancy. And also for the instances of rape or incest. I think everybody can find a common ground there at least. So I think that that's something that we can work on, and I look forward to being a part of that.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie, same question.
Thank you. I'll answer this from kind of a pragmatic perspective. And again, Idaho's a pro-life state. I mean, overwhelmingly, I think you'd find that that's the case. And, that used to be a simple question. People would ask, are you pro-life or you pro-choice? And you'd answer, and that'd kind of tell them what they wanted to know. But it's not that easy anymore. There's so many nuances involved, the women's health, the rape, incest, the viability of the pregnancy. There's just so many things that's involved now. Do we prosecute the doctor? Do we prosecute the mother? I mean, all these ideas that are coming up that are really on the fringe. Just putting it straight up, I'm pro-life and I'm opposed to elective abortions, because I look at the life growing inside of a mother, and I believe that's a life worth protection and rises to a higher level than simply framing it as a healthcare decision. Now, you take that out of it, I think the government needs to be careful about intervening in healthcare decisions. But once there's another life involved there, then that's where I kind of draw the line, at least for me. Again, I think the pivot point, and this is going to be an issue this year, it certainly is the mother's health in danger? Does the fetus have no chance of survival? Is the pregnancy no longer viable? Is it rape or incest involved? And there's certainly other exemptions. But again, to electively abort a viable, healthy pregnancy goes against my belief structure. But I think there is a bill in there that will fit, and that we can maybe, make the right decision to have that issue maybe put to bed for a while, because it's just come up every year, and it'll continue to come up until we get it framed in the right manner. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Ruckte?
Yeah, so these abortion bills, everybody's seen that really it's the far right in the Idaho legislature has just gotten more and more extreme when it comes to these issues. And, for example, a year or two ago, there was a bill that was passed that would allow the siblings or the parents of the rapist to sue the doctor who performed an abortion for the rape victim. There was a bill proposed a couple of years ago that would have allowed the woman to be thrown in jail, and I think the doctor to be thrown in jail. But the idea is just keep getting more and more extreme. Here's the bottom line. We all know when you talk to families that have gone through this, that these health issues, these situations get very complicated very fast. And for the government to sit back and say they know best how to handle each of these situations when they don't even know what the facts of that case are going to be, I think is really silly. If I'm hoping we get some rational legislation that provides some compromises. At a minimum, there needs to be exceptions for rape, incest, life and health of the mother. But how we define those things will just further show us how complicated these issues become for real families. I mean, these are real decisions that families have to make as to whether to move forward with a pregnancy. And I don't think the government should be making those decisions. And I especially don't think, most of us in the legislature are well beyond our childbearing years. It's been years since we've had to make these decisions and think about these issues. And I think we should stay out of it.
Thank you. Representative Garner?
Yes, I'd love to use the excuse that I'm a freshman and I don't know enough about this subject to comment, but I look forward to learning more about it. And I'll stick with that on the HIPAA one. But as for the abortion, I am pro-life. I think Senator Guthrie covered it very well. I think there's definitely times when we need to, it can't be just a black and white issue. There's times when it is appropriate. That's where I stand.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to water. Groundwater quality in Idaho's aquifers is being rapidly degraded by agricultural chemicals, industrial scale, small scale farming operations, industrial chemicals, septic waste from high density, unsewered residential developments. The Idaho Department of Environmental Quality has no authority to require that Idaho drinking water sources are protected for current or future use. Legislators have a responsibility to ensure that laws are in place to prevent degradation of groundwater and drinking water. Please describe your vision of protecting drinking water resources in Idaho. And we go back to Senator Guthrie.
Thank you. And I think you've just touched on what I believe might be the most important, if not the most glamorous issue that we'll face this year. It sounds cliche, but water is the lifeblood of the state. I looked at Article 15, Section 7, and it does grant the Department of Water Resources the power to formulate and implement a state water plan for optimum development of water resources in the public interest. And that public interest would include water quality as well as quantity. And as you know, we've been in a drought. Those of you that followed it, the aquifer has been depleted by some 13 million acre feet. And we're kind of in a situation. A lot of ranchers and farmers were curtailed last year, including myself. And so it's a serious issue. And when you have less water, you have a greater potential for pollution. That's just the economy of scale. And the old saying, the solution to pollution is dilution. And as crude as that sound is kind of true. When you have less water, you've got more problems with water quality. I guess my question would be, has the DEQ been involved at the table when those water plans are developed and changed? And if they're not, they should be. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's one to find out, because they certainly should be involved as those plans are developed. I'm not a scientist, a hydrologist, or an environmentalist necessarily, as far as wearing that on my sleeve, but we can no longer ignore the water issues. We've got to manage this resource more effectively, and keep in mind that regardless of your interest, whether it's recreation, it's agriculture, or regardless, just the beauty of Idaho, we've got to protect this resource. You look down at what's happened to the Colorado River and Lake Mead, Lake Powell, and if that isn't a wake-up call for us, then I don't know what is. So it's a very, very important issue. So I appreciate that question. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Recty?
Yeah, I don't know that I can add much more than what Senator Guthrie just provided. I'm not an expert on water, but I do recognize that water from the beginning years of this state has been a crucial issue, and one that's been carefully balanced. But of course, now we're really in just a critical era for water in Idaho. And if you are paying attention to what happened in Colorado, what's going on with, the Colorado River, and how quickly that resource has depleted, it should cause everybody pause. It should scare everybody, frankly, because if it can happen there, it can happen here. There's heavy competition for this resource amongst all stakeholders. And I am confident, though, that we have a good system in place where we can find the compromises necessary to, ensure that we have water available for critical uses. But I suspect it's going to require sacrifice in the coming years.
Thank you. Representative Garner?
Okay, I have no knowledge of any scientific study that says Idaho aquifers are being degraded or polluted. What are your sources?
I did not have the source.
Okay, if you have any, please send it to me.
Okay.
I will tell you from experience that no farmer puts more chemicals or fertilizers on their fields than needed. It's too costly and most small farmers can't even afford what is recommended to put on their fields. I myself have not used commercial fertilizer for the last 20 years because it's become too highly cost prohibitive to use. Now, it makes sense that more wells are drilled into the aquifer. As more wells are drilled into the aquifer, it is a greater chance of contamination. And perhaps we should look at incentives that would promote community wells rather than each individual household having a well. But I wouldn't want to infringe on any personal property rights or wells that are already in existence to do this. If we're going to look at having the DEQ involved in this or to promote that we have community wells, it needs to be on an incentive basis.
Thank you. Representative Roberts?
Well, I know that, here in Pocatello, we do have a few issues with that comes out of one of the old waste receiving areas, that there's some issues with pollutants entering the drinking water system. And I know that the Pocatello City and Bannock County have been working very hard at monitoring that situation and finding ways to remediate that. I know that one of the presentations that I sat through in December was with the Department of Environmental Quality, talking about some of the things that they're hoping to work with the legislature on this year. And they did mention that there are some sizable grants coming out of the ARPA funds. And on the page that I have here, it's showing that Bannock County, and that's for drinking water and wastewater grant and construction loans. And that Bannock County has over $4 million available to them for that. I know that the counties are working with DEQ in that area to utilize those funds and help protect our drinking water. And I don't think that, I think that the farmers and ranchers in our area are also very concerned about the water issues that we have. And, hopefully we have a good snow year, and, it will help to refill some of the aquifers. Again, in the paper today, I know there's some of the reports there showing that some of our reservoirs are starting to refill. Some of them have been lowered for construction issues, like American Falls that had some work done on their dam, and that reservoir was lowered for a time frame there. And hopefully in the upcoming spring, we start to see some of those fill up, because obviously, agricultural issues involve water very closely, and we need to make sure that we take care of those things for them. So,
thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to building codes. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Act provides funding for technical assistance to develop modern building codes and workforce training to implement modern building techniques. Updated building codes mean our businesses, industries, and homes are warmer in winter, cooler in summer, and spend less on energy. What will you do to ensure that Idaho's building codes are modernized to allow the state to benefit from this funding? We'll start this question with Senator Ruckte.
Well, I'm not going to have much to say about this. I want to see the legislation, of course, but I am in favor of improving our building codes so that we have more energy efficient buildings and standards. And I think that's, a simple thing we can do to reduce energy consumption in the state. But I'd want to see, of course, what the legislation says.
Okay. Representative Garner.
I don't feel building code should be used to promote one product over another, or one type of structure over another, or techniques of building over another technique of building. I feel building code should focus on safety factors involved with construction and finished product. It would be detrimental to the state or the industry in a whole, I think, to say that all buildings have to be 50% under grade or something like that because it holds the heat in. Maybe I don't like the looks of that, and I want one that's out where you can see it. So that's why I feel this way. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Roberts.
there's a number of issues that fall here. Of course, there's the quality of the structure for the consumer. So if you're buying a house, you're purchasing a house that has, current codes, whether that be electrical, plumbing, your physical building structure codes that have requirements that are for the safety and the value of the home, to make sure that the home lasts a while, right? There's also the energy requirement codes, and those have been put in place, yes, to help provide energy savings for the homeowner, to guarantee that there's at least a minimum standard, that the homeowner isn't going to buy one house and have a really nice, warm winter, cool summer, and not have high cost involved with that. If you buy another house that's outside of the building codes realm, it may not be that way. And you have that now when you buy an older home. Of course, you know that older home is going to be more energy inefficient. So what the building codes have been set into place is to make sure that in the future, the homes aren't less efficient, but they retain a certain level of efficiency. The other thing that follows in line here is that many of the federal home loan guarantors, like housing and urban development, FHA, VA loans, and so forth, have certain requirements that the home must meet for the loan to be acceptable for that system. So we have to be aware of what we're doing here in the state of Idaho. Now, many of the building regulations and codes are part of the regulation system that each building or each sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. It's not written necessarily at the legislature, but it is approved at the legislature. So, and that's been part of the zero regulation process that Governor Little has put into place, which has been very good because it does allow for elimination of old regulations that need to be removed from the books. But it can be bad if the new regulations aren't held up to a certain standard.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
I probably won't have a lot on this either. I will say this, that in the Commerce Committee every year, we review and adopt, in general, the international building codes and those updates almost every year, sometimes almost to the point of diminishing returns. And some of the ideas are pretty fringe, in my opinion. There was one idea to have a charging station requirement so that you could charge electric vehicles. There's been dabbling about, some have dabbled in the arena of putting sprinklers in some of these homes and things, and that's not in code now, but you can get to the point where you price the consumer out of the house. And so there's a balance there as well. As far as the federal money, too often strings come with that federal money. And I'm like Senator Ruckty. I want to see what's involved, what that bipartisan infrastructure money looks like, and how we employ that to good use in Idaho. So I'd withhold judgment until we see what's involved with that.
Okay, thank you. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 provided stimulus funds for state, local, and tribal governments by distributing funds to states for healthcare, education, childcare, and broadband connectivity. In the past, the Idaho legislature rejected millions of dollars of federal stimulus money. More federal money is available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. What determines the decision to accept or reject these funds? And what are your priorities on the use of this money to improve the lives of all Idahoans? I will start this one with Representative Garner.
I would look at and probably be very concerned of what strings were attached to the funds and what it said we had to use the funds for. My priorities would be education, access to technology, and transportation. And I would love to see some funds for water storage projects, but I'm not sure there will be any.
Okay. Representative Roberts.
Yeah, I agree that, we have to take a close look at, what these funds are earmarked for. Obviously, childcare is a very important issue, especially for young working families. That childcare can be an enormous cost for a family. And I think that if we can find a method that we can use federal dollars to help support that, I think it would be a great thing to do. But of course, it always involves making sure that the bill that's coming through the legislature is effective and efficient and doesn't, tie Idaho to something that we may not be want to be tied to. And that's, I agree that, when the previous sessions of the legislature turned down millions in funding for early childhood education, I wasn't part of that system. I don't understand, what possibly they saw as earmarks. It might have been a problem for them, but I know that many in the public felt that would have been an important thing to take. And so, we're going to have to take public input on a lot of this information too, and make sure that we share all the information efficiently, not just try to share it on partisan lines, but rather share according to what we feel that Idaho deserves and needs, and be able to efficiently provide for the citizens of Idaho. And, when, I was looking at some numbers mentioning that, our school system has, nearly 300,000 young people enrolled in. And, the number that I saw was amazing, that it possibly 47% of those are living in poverty. I mean, these are things that we can utilize some of these federal funds to help fix and repair. And I think that we should look into that as much as possible.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie?
Thank you. And I apologize in advance for a brief soapbox moment, but in my opinion, the federal government went absolutely overboard as it pushed money out to the states, money that it didn't have, to the point that Idaho had more money than they could responsibly spend. And we had department folks tell us that they just really couldn't spend anymore. It was that ridiculous. And keep in mind that Idaho's government, business, and citizens received in excess of $18 billion through this COVID money, and through the decades of poor decisions. Now the federal government has us 33 trillion plus in debt, or $100,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. That's not responsible. You couldn't run your household that way. And keep in mind, Idaho was one of the lowest as far as in terms of per capita of the federal money that we received. We were one of the lowest. So states all over the country got even more money. And then we wonder why inflation's killing us. I mean, it absolutely drove inflation to where it's at today, in my opinion. And for example, you look at all these projects that they put out money for to do, and I'll give you a couple examples. One is Preston had a water treatment facility that they had to do down there. Their original estimated bids were 39 million. Well, because there's so much money out there, contractors are picking and choosing, and they have raised their rates like I guess anybody else would in a free market. And now that project coming at 59 million. And so did they really save any by getting the federal money to help offset the project? And these projects and roads and bridges and everything else are costing exponentially more because of all this extra money than they would in stable economic times. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rutte.
Yeah, there's a lot of needs throughout the state for broadband, for example, in our rural communities. There are places in Idaho that lack that broadband connectivity that they need. So their students can take advantage of the opportunities found on the internet, so they can people can work remotely. So, essentially those in our rural communities can enjoy the things that are more urban areas enjoy when it comes to broadband connectivity. A lot of sewer and water line needs, especially some of our tribal communities have ancient, dilapidated sewer and water lines that need to be replaced. So there were a lot of needs that were addressed, that could have been addressed and are being addressed by these monies. A lot of the rejection of the money, I frankly am in agreement with a lot of the criticism that Senator Guthrie has for how much money was pushed out. Probably didn't get the amount of money right. So much money in the system all at once makes projects cost more. I think that those are all valid criticisms. But a lot of what you heard during the session when legislators wanted to reject some of these monies didn't have anything to do with those items. It was usually less thoughtful criticism and not really that helpful. And the fact of the matter was the money had been allocated by the federal government. In other words, you can reject it, but all you're doing is hurting yourself. We've got the money available. We should use it for the projects it's been earmarked for, fulfill the requirements, and use the money and improve our, invest in Idaho, especially at a time when we have unprecedented increases in population who are demanding more from our infrastructure.
Thank you. We'll go on to energy and transportation. Transportation in Idaho produces 1/3 of all our greenhouse gases. Some Idaho communities and school districts have received hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants to install EV charging stations and to buy electric school buses. Electrification keeps millions of dollars in state, boosting Idaho's economy rather than sending it out of state. What can the legislature do to build upon the electric vehicle movement? And this time we start with Representative Roberts.
Well, as an electrician, obviously, one of the focuses that we've had in our training systems as part of maintaining your electrical license here in the state of Idaho is making sure that you're aware of the updated national electric code systems. And we have whole new code sections that involve electric vehicle charging systems, both in installations for residential and installations for commercial systems. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, of course, has put money towards installing electrical vehicle charging stations along the interstates. And I know that Idaho Department of Transportation has been working with the federal government in finding the proper locations for those installations. And a matter of fact, I think they've actually been looking at finding other locations other than some of the interstates here in Idaho, because we don't have as many miles of interstate, especially when it comes to North Idaho. And so they're looking to see if there isn't some other locations for those. Now, the the greenhouse gas issue that, is mentioned there, that, 30% or 1/3 of our greenhouse gas production is coming from transportation, I mean, that's going to be something that we're going to have to work on across the nation. And, Idaho, I think, is still working very well. I know that, farm and ranchers and even, our truck drivers are looking to find ways to make their systems more efficient, especially as diesel prices are gone up. And, that's it's become very important for everybody to maintain a more efficient transportation system. And I think Idaho is on the right path, and we can continue to provide for the future here in Idaho.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie?
Thank you. I guess in some respects, as far as my opinion, the electrical vehicle movement is troubling on some fronts. There's a notion that it's clean and it's green, and that's not entirely true. And I think we need to have a fair discussion, and let's talk about what it takes to put those electrons in that car battery. Is it coal? Is it fracking? Is it natural gas? Is it wind energy that can pollute our visual landscape or sometimes kill birds? Is it hydro that compromises the salmon population, or solar that requires a lot of raw materials for mining? And then you talk about the batteries that it takes, and those enormous batteries. And again, the mining required to extract the raw materials and the disposal issues of these retired batteries. I have no problem having the discussion, but let's get serious about it. And let's talk about the total carbon footprint of this electric phase that we're entered into and the impacts that this movement has on our environment. You talk about these charging stations, and we was talking to some auto dealers, and they're, of course, the manufacturers are pushing these electric vehicles out to the dealerships, but these charging stations are not all created equal. There's what they call a level 1, 2, and 3, and some of those take forever to charge a battery up, and the ones that do it quickly are very, very expensive. So this isn't the panacea that everybody thinks it is. There's some issues there that we need to have serious discussions about and be honest about the environmental impact that this movement's going to have, along with the other discussions. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Ruckey?
Yeah, I think Jim brings up good points. Somebody's ox is going to get gored, and we need to be aware that this isn't a panacea that's going to fix all problems. But what we do know is that man-made contributions to climate change are real. We've got a real problem with our carbon footprint. We've got to figure out ways to address that. The electric vehicle, is the electric vehicle system going to reduce that carbon footprint? It appears that it will, but we need a lot more research and technological advancements to get it to the point where consumers are ready to embrace it, to make sure that we fix problems like the length of time it takes to charge a battery, the detriment to our environment from a battery-based vehicle system. These are all things we need to figure out. But I think it's okay that that we're heading this direction. I'll be very supportive of these sorts of programs. We've got to get electric vehicle charging stations so that they are conveniently located throughout. It has to be just part of our everyday use. I see electric vehicle charging stations at hotels now. We're going to see a lot more of that. They've got to be everywhere because it's just got to be convenient for consumers to use. But it's not without its drawbacks, and hopefully future technology advancements will minimize those drawbacks.
Thank you. Representative Garner?
Yes, I'd have to echo Senator Guthrie's concerns. It's my understanding that we don't have enough mines to provide the nickel and stuff that they need to make the batteries, let alone, and they seem to forget that they use big gas-powered loaders and conveyors and everything to get that component out of the earth. So I'm not so sure that these electric vehicles aren't going to make a a bigger carbon footprint instead of a lesser one. My opinion in my economic classes that I looking back on, I would say that the state government at least should do nothing. The legislature should let the free market decide whether the idea fails or succeeds. They should not give incentives to promote these ideas over others. It would limit maybe new technology from coming forth. If it's a good idea, I think it'll stand on its own. If it's not a good idea, I believe it'll fail. I believe that this will guide us to a solution that should be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. On election integrity, states have the constitutional responsibility of overseeing elections and protecting voters. Idahoans enjoy having few voting restrictions, such as voting by mail, same-day registration, absentee ballots, accessible ballot boxes, and early voting. The Secretary of State reported negligible voter fraud in Idaho. Last session, some legislators supported bills to change Idaho voter election procedures. What will you do to ensure our voting rights are protected? We start with Senator Guthrie.
Thank you for that question. And that is going to be a big issue this year, and it will come through the committee that both James and I are on, these election issues. Last year, I looked it up, and there were 45 election bills that were introduced last year. So that gives you some indication. But I am in agreement that Idaho has shown very few issues with respect to voter fraud. I agree with that. And I'm also encouraged after talking to our Secretary of State, Phil McGrain, and I'm encouraged by his approach and thought process. In fact, tomorrow he's invited me to participate in an election forum with Chairman Crane from the House State Affairs Committee. All of I guess the county clerks are in town, a lot of those election people. So we'll be talking to them, and that'll maybe be able to allow me to glean some further insight as to what they feel is important coming this year. I'm not pretending there's not room for improvement, and neither is Secretary McGrain. But I think that there'll be sensible upgrades to our election laws rather than radical changes. The pandemic is what really started. It was the epicenter of what started all this election stuff and the way voting changed to accommodate the fact that people couldn't get out and different things. But I think in Idaho, we can't overreact based on what we're seeing around the nation. I think there is problems around the nation, but we can't overreact on those anecdotal examples that we hear about. And I, for one, while I agree that there's been problems around the country, I don't think elections were stolen. I'm not in that camp. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Ruchte.
Thank you. Yeah, this is an area that Idaho should be really proud of, that we do so well when it comes to our election integrity. I'll fight any efforts to reduce voters' rights in this arena. I think we should be able to vote early. I think we should be able to vote by mail. There have been a lot of attempts to restrict our ability to vote. I don't think Idahoans are in favor of that. I certainly am not. This is one of those areas I think we have to be especially sensitive about when it comes to unfounded accusations. So, what you would hear in the legislature is unfounded accusations about election integrity. And that's, frankly, I suppose it's led to some good things. For example, Secretary of State's office goes around and does audits after every election cycle, just to test and to show really the public that the vote counts are accurate, that the machines are working well. And then it gives publicity to that. So everybody hears that. We hear that our elections are sound and working like they should. In the legislature, there tends to be unsubstantiated allegations in a lot of areas. For example, you remember that from the CRT controversy, CRT in schools, porn in libraries, no evidence of it. And yet it gains traction in the legislature, even though there's no data or facts, science to back it up. But they do it anyway. It's especially problematic when you do that to elections, because in a democracy, if people lose faith in the election, the integrity of their elections, you lose democracy. You lose it. And so that's why you've seen such an effort, such a strong effort nationwide to fight back against these allegations of election fraud.
Thank you. Representative Garner?
Yes, I think our Secretary of State and our county clerks do a wonderful job. You'll see them up all night counting until they're done, and they're accurate. I think Idaho doesn't have a problem. I have full confidence in the elections and how they are administered. That was one of the things that shocked me when I ran, was that how few people vote. I would like to see more people more involved and get out and vote. It makes a difference, and they need to have that confidence that their vote will count to do that. That being said, you've always got to keep a mindful eye, because we don't want our democracy undermined by new ways to influence the election or corrupt it. But I think they do a great job.
Thank you. Representative Roberts?
Well, I appreciate everything that the panel has said here. The senators covered the issue very well. I agree. Idaho's election system is one of the best. We have paper ballots that are maintained over a period of time. The tabulators are not connected to the internet, and the reports that are sent via secure systems to the Secretary of State. There's, and there's an way to increase participation. And I think that's Idaho does a very good job with that. And I think that, maintaining our absentee ballot system, maintaining our early voting that's available, maintaining our same-day registration, all of these are going to be key to increasing participation in the election system. And I will work with anybody I can in the legislature to make sure that we keep Idaho's election system the way it is, because it is one of the best. It's very secure. It is shown to be without problem. When we do recounts, things rarely change, and if they do, it's by 1 to 2 votes. We've had many recounts. Representative Syme in West Idaho lost his election by 6 votes. They did the recount; it stayed the same. We've seen situations like that. I have full confidence in Idaho's election system, and I think that our citizens should also have that full confidence.
Thank you so much. Criminal justice is our last question. Idaho's Department of Corrections houses over 8,000 incarcerated individuals in 9 state-owned prisons, county jails, and out-of-state facilities. The average cost to house a prisoner in Idaho was $74 a day in 2020. The legislature is often asked to fund more prison beds. Other than building more prisons, what will you do to reduce Idaho's crowded prisons and jails? And do you support any alternatives to imprisonment? We start this one with Senator Ruchte.
Yes, thanks. It's a good question. About 15 years ago, when I was in the legislature before, there was a real effort to back away from mandatory minimums, to take a look at our felony crimes and determine whether some of those could be misdemeanors. In other words, are we making the punishment for a crime too severe, which obviously causes more people to end up in prison, which leads to this problem we're talking about. And then we have a problem finding beds for prisoners. We end up, at one point when I was in the legislature before, we turned to a private prison system. And I think universally people realized that was a mistake. There were lots of problems with the private prison system. So the things that I'm in favor of that I think would improve this problem would be, again, to take a look at our criminal code and determine whether we have too many felonies. Maybe we can reduce some of those to misdemeanors. Just because you reduce something to a misdemeanor does not mean that there's no punishment. You can have severe punishment under a misdemeanor. And then, we should look at mandatory minimums. Do we have too many mandatory minimums? I do think there is a place for mandatory minimums. I think it can send the right message for certain types of crimes, but I worry that mandatory minimums are overused in the state and therefore increase our prison populations.
Thank you. Representative Garner.
Yes, this is a concern throughout the state. There's many counties that don't have a county jail, or Franklin County happens to be one of those. And because of this, when something happens, even if it's a parking ticket or something where it goes out for warrant, when they're caught, they have to be sent to Soda Springs, which costs the county more money, which of course filters down to the community and the people in the county by higher taxes. This is something that needs to be looked at. How you attack it, I'm not quite sure. I look forward to having legislation come forward and reading some of the ideas of my fellow legislators on it. Do I support alternatives? I'd have to say it depends. If it's a minor infraction that's gone to warrant or something like that that isn't a threat to the community, I'd say yes, I support having public service done instead or something. If it's a violent offense, absolutely not.
Thank you. Representative Roberts.
Yeah, this is it's an important subject. Obviously, we do need to make sure that our Department of Corrections is funded adequately. If that means that we need to find a method to provide more beds, then we'll need to find that method. But I think that it also goes into looking into the future. An investment in our education system will provide more opportunity for our young individuals to be able to live a life without maybe reaching or winding up across that line of whether they're a legal citizen or have done something, an infraction of something that puts them into the judicial system. I think that we could look at maybe providing more parole officers that can help to maintain some of that system of the parolees and to be able to help them out. I know in my job, I work in construction, and there's a number of individuals that spend time interacting with their parole officers, and it can be difficult. It takes them away from their job. And when you're a working person and you're having difficulties in the legal system, and it takes away from your job, you're losing money from your paycheck, and many times they're having to pay fines or fees to the judicial system to take care of their infractions. And so it becomes a downward spiral for many individuals. And I think that there's a way that we can find to help change that system and make it better and more efficient for everybody.
Thank you. And Senator Guthrie.
In the past, and a few years ago, some code sections were revisited, reducing misdemeanors to infractions where it made sense, and that I suppose helped some. And I've heard that there will be legislation this year that will allow judges some discretion on what has been fixed sentences, because not all crimes are created equal. And I think that to some extent, the judges' hands have been tied on some of these things, and it might allow them a little more discretion, and that might make the crime fit the sentence a little better. And I would support some alternatives, and I think some of them could be, and Nate hit on one of them, and they actually focused on this a few years ago, but I don't know to what extent it was successful, and that's putting more resources and effort into the parole and probation end, so that you help stem that recidivism as people coming back into the system. And the other thing that we found out a few years ago when they had a committee do a study on that is that Idaho, because of the processing, the way they process these folks, they're not actually releasing them as quickly as they could be. And so that's keeping people in beds and in prison longer than they actually should be. They've served their sentence. They just don't get them processed out. So I think there's some room for improvements, but I guess I'll just tie it up and put a bow on it by saying, that old narrative about better education equals less incarceration. I concur with that. So anyway, I think that's an important factor as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's all the questions that we have time for tonight. Many thanks to our legislators and our audience for attending this evening. This forum was recorded and will be available for viewing in the next few days on the League of Women Voters Pocatello website and on YouTube. We want to remind you that your voice matters. Be sure to contact our legislators with your comments and your questions. And just a quick reminder before we close, you can email Representatives Manwaring and Cheatham for their written answers to tonight's questions. You can find their emails on the Idaho Legislative website, which we will link. Thanks again to everyone for participating, and thank you to KISU for airing this evening. Good night.